where I investigated all kinds of fraud, mostly financial crimes, money laundering, embezzlement, credit card fraud, all those things. Retired in 2020, became a regulator of online sports betting in Tennessee, and I've been with GeoComply now for about 2.5 years.
Great. Let's throw it over to Eric.
David, thank you, and thanks for inviting me to participate in this panel. Really looking forward to our discussion this morning. So yeah, my name is Eric Weiss, and I'm the president of North American operations for a company called Odds On Compliance. We're a technology and consulting company that specializes in sports betting, iGaming, and gambling compliance, primarily in the United States, Canada, and in Europe. So prior to joining Odds On Compliance, I spent 30 years with the New Jersey Division of Gaming Enforcement, conducted, many of those years responsible for conducting casino operation investigations into not only cage and system operations, but slot investigations and IT investigations. In 2008, I took over the slot lab and I became the director of technical services in our testing laboratory. That includes, the testing and approval of all electronic gaming equipment, slot machines, and systems that are used in the state of New Jersey. And that included online gaming in 2013. And then in 2016, I was promoted by Director Rebuck, became his chief of staff before I retired and moved over to the private sector with Odds On. I think what attracted me to Odds On Compliance is, and what makes this company special is two things. It's our technology and our people. Our team consists of former regulators, not just, a regulator like myself with technical experience, but also licensing investigators, revenue certification investigators as well. We also employ experienced gaming attorneys. We have independent test lab professionals, licensing specialists, auditors. We have a former internet games manager, former employees of various different operators that have industry experience in the online space. But then again, we also have people that have experience in the retail space. We have former finance director, cage person, revenue audit, and casino audit. So really, with this level of expertise and broad level of experience that we have, there's really no compliance issue that we really can't manage. And our technology complements our experience, right? So our primary technology that I'll talk about is something called Playbook. And what that technology does, it brings together all of the regulations in the United States, in Ontario, in 35 countries in Europe, and now Brazil. So it comes into one searchable database, one really intuitive interface to allow people to do searches on regulations, industry advisories, and to be able to compare different jurisdictions. I'll probably talk more about that as the seminar goes on. But I'd like to talk about two other quickly announcements and technology that we're involved with. This year, we developed a product called ProBet. It was a joint venture between Odds On Compliance and US Integrity. And what ProBet does, it allows us to identify people who are prohibited from gambling, right? Most jurisdictions that have regulated sports betting prohibit coaches, athletes, trainers, referees from being able to gamble on their sport. What we developed was the first commercially available tool to allow operators and sports teams to work together to do that in a way with a high level of security by encrypting the data, and the data gets compared in the cloud in encrypted format. So when we identify a potential issue, we allow the operator to work with the sports leagues. And so that's in its introductory phase, and we're in the process of rolling that out as part of a pilot program. And then during that process, as a partnership with US Integrity, we realized that our companies complement each other very well. And They're a technology company. We're a technology company. We're both involved in compliance, involved in integrity, and we have just completed a merger between the two companies. So Odds On Compliance and US Integrity are now one company, and we are going to have an announcement in the near future on what the name of that company is. I just can't reveal it here today. So that's kind of my background and the background on Odds On Compliance.
Thanks, Eric. All right, let's go with Shane Lashkari. He's subbing in here for Vishal Patel, who's not feeling well today. So, Shane,
hey guys, thank you, David. And as everyone said, thank you for putting this together for all of us and having me on here. Things like these are an honor for us because it's always great to have the opportunity in the audience to really go over these critical success factors when it comes to online gaming. And so we do appreciate every opportunity we get. My name is Shane Lashkari. I've been with Division of Gaming Enforcement for over 20 years. And like Eric mentioned, essentially, we're unique in the sense that we have our own lab here in New Jersey. And so all the electronic gaming equipment that gets utilized in the New Jersey jurisdiction, whether it's online or whether it's brick and mortar, would come through my lab. And so we have a staff here that includes engineers, statisticians, cybersecurity experts, investigators, and together and collaboratively, what they do is basically test every single electronic gaming equipment that gets utilized for the New Jersey jurisdiction. And that includes all things, whether it's KYC, geolocation, software that's utilized for AML, things along those lines. So anything that the industry wants to use would have to come through our jurisdiction. Our lab would review it, we'd approve it, and then they can use it.
Great. Thanks, Shane. And finally, Joseph from Kinectify.
Hi, everyone. Like everyone said before, it's great to be in company with such experts in the gaming space and participate in this panel. And so I'm Joseph. I'm the CEO of Kinectify. Kinectify is an intelligence and risk management tech company. So the first module we released was our all-in-one anti-money laundering module, module that handles A to Z all anti-money laundering investigations, risk scoring, detecting patterns of suspicious activity, case management, investigations, government filings, like the SAR filings, all of that in one place. Similar to how banks have had it for years, but has not been available to that scope in gaming before. And then we follow that module with the beta version of our RG module, which we developed in partnership with Cambridge Behavioral Health. So bringing in the clinical side and the research side of problem gambling with our technologists and our expertise in monitoring transactions, and pull those together. And we're maturing that module over the course of this next year. And then we really specialize in connecting gaming and gaming data at organizations and providing these central enterprise views. So never before in gaming have you been able to track a single player's activity across an entire enterprise, like an MGM with 16 casino properties. It was all property by property. And now that's changed with our technology being able to monitor activity. The results have been great. Like we're talking like 90% efficiency gains, and we're identifying over 40% more suspicious activity. And so we also have our sister company, Kinectify Advisors, and we provide advisory and management services and managed services to help design and test risk management programs, provide fully managed services for the day-to-day administration of compliance programs. We found when we launched this kind of this digital transformation, right? You're launching this new technology and people are completely changing how they're doing risk management work, that there's a lot of help needed to retool compliance teams and reconfigure the way that they do the work. And so our sister company, Kinectify Advisors, helps that. In terms of me, I've always been in anti-money laundering. That's been my thing since the beginning. I joined the Marine Corps right out of high school at the ripe old age of 17 years old, and really got interested in the Middle East. So I went to grad school at George Washington and studied Middle East studies, U.S. foreign policy in the Middle East, spent years in the region, and then got into anti-money laundering that way when the banks were having a lot of issues with high-risk jurisdictions after the terrorist attacks, 9/11 and all of that. And so I got into anti-money laundering, doing international enhanced due diligence, KYC, all that good stuff, and advising some of the top financial institutions on that. And then I got into regulatory technology, working on really advanced sanctions and illicit finance technology for Karen that now serves top banks and executive due diligence, that serves the U.S. government and others with third-party due diligence tools, and then went into gaming. And so I spent time at Caesars Entertainment and AML after their enforcement action, and was there from kind of early in the days of them modernizing their AML program, and realized that the gaming industry was lacking in modern software tools to manage this area of risk. So we launched Kinectify to solve that problem 3 years ago, and it's been an exciting ride ever since.
Great. Thanks, Joseph. And thank you to all for joining us today. I am really looking forward to this discussion. You guys are all experts in this field, and I think it's going to be fascinating. So I'm going to kick off the first question now. And that question is, how has technology evolved to impact compliance measures in online gambling, specifically in areas such as anti-money laundering, KYC, and then to add on to that, how will new technologies such as big data and AI come to impact compliance even further as we look beyond 2024? And I'm going to start off with Joseph on this one.
Yeah, it's a great question. And it's a really big question, a really broad question, talking about the evolution of technology, right? In the gaming space, specifically for online gaming, but it's even a bigger problem, right? Brick and mortar companies, land-based companies are also engaging with iGaming and online gaming. So it really runs together when you're talking about AML and tracking players' activity across your entire portfolio of services and businesses. So, you know, just to be honest, if we're honest with ourselves, like online operators had it tough at launch. They literally had no software for anti-money laundering when they launched. And so they were throwing people at the problem, armed with spreadsheets and like these general data analytic tools like Power BI. Like some of the bigger operators, they were using Salesforce and customer service tools like Zendesk to try to like manage cases and case management, and along with their spreadsheets and things like that. So you see this ballooning of compliance departments that have like 40 plus analysts, right? So you're managing these massive workforces trying to analyze transactions. And when you're talking about bigger operators at scales, like your DraftKings and your FanDuels, they do 35 million transactions a day, right? You're talking gaming activity and financial transactions. You do 12 billion transactions a year. How can a human, 40 analysts, keep up with monitoring patterns over 35 million transactions a day, right? Without modern technology that's scalable, and you're using the most cutting edge technology to identify patterns. So you come into these issues, these regulatory issues with anti-money, with RG, not identifying these patterns as, you know, they should be, and they're struggling. And so, and the problem really isn't isolated to online operators. Like I said, land-based operators too have had this problem. You know, historically they've had legacy systems and they had their data on site. And so their legacy systems were operating on these servers on site. They can't connect to each other. So they can't see a player's activity across their enterprise, and they can't properly risk score. They can't properly identify patterns across their enterprise. So, and they have limited connectivity to outside data sources and all of this. And so this is really expensive for them to operate in terms of not just human resources, but just the technology. Like a server costs $600,000, right? And like how many servers are you going to buy to process all of this data and try to identify these patterns and try to connect and network servers to each other? And you can't when they're like in different states, and all of these issues are very expensive for them to try to manage. So now, talking about the evolution, like we're witnessing truly a digital transformation in the gaming space. And there's people on this call that are helping bring that forward, right? Odds on compliance, GeoComply, all these people, we are witnessing something that is transformative in the gaming space. We're talking about real-time data feeds that are infinitely scalable, that can handle big data in real time, right? We at Kinectify can import these 35 million transactions, and instantaneously we scale out our services, we scale out our servers. And then you have lots of data visualizations, tight workflow, connectivity, lots of data, lots of source systems, enriching your data with outside providers. You have sophisticated pattern recognition with machine learning, with AI, and with not only that, just modern technology like NoSQL databases, graph databases. There's all kinds of things out there to help identify connections between data and identify patterns of activity. The other thing we have is you can deploy software every 2 weeks and you don't have to go on site to do software version updates anymore, right? You can deploy software every day if you wanted to. We do it on a 2-week cycle following standard software development processes. So last year we did 25 software deployments. So we can update our risk models in real time, and we can identify the suspicious patterns in real time, keeping up with the bad actors, right? And at scale, these bigger operators, they're set to save so many millions of dollars on data processing, infrastructure costs, on repurposing human resources to add value to the organization instead of just filling out government forms and gathering data and playing around with spreadsheets, right? Like we can take these very, very valuable human resources and apply them in areas to add a ton of value to the organization. So that's where I see like the evolution of technology. It is really truly this unique time in gaming where there's this digital transformation happening, and we're seeing modern technology proliferating across the gaming space today, and it's really exciting time.
Yeah, I'd like to add to that, and I agree with everything Joseph was saying. And, technology, it continues to evolve in the compliance space, but regulations evolve as well. And I think you brought up the know your customer aspect of this. And Joseph talked mostly about the anti-money laundering and big data and analyzing it. But I think KYC is a good example of how things evolve. And I think that, the KYC process itself is critically important for a whole bunch of reasons, right? You have to be able to have accurate data. When a customer creates an account, you need accuracy of data. Full person's name, social security number, date of birth, street address. And if you don't have a good KYC process at the onset, when you're onboarding something, it'll affect other regulatory aspects of your operation, not just AML and BSA compliance, but it also comes into play with other areas like W2G tax reporting when there's a jackpot, the enforcement of self-exclusion or blacklisted customers, even the prevention of underage gambling. If you don't have accurate data and valid data through the KYC process, it could impact these things. The deadbeat dad lookups, the preventions of bonus abuse, other types of fraud. So I look back when we started in 2013, it was outcome oriented. We just said you had to have these fields completed with accuracy when you created a customer account. And what we found was that operators kind of wanted to reduce friction in the onboarding process, so they were willing to kind of relax certain areas and be able to compete on the basis of their willingness to accept risk with regard to the creation of an account, and that created problems. So I think what New Jersey did and some other jurisdictions have followed since put together heightened rules. Not only did they talk about outcome oriented, meaning it has to be effective, but they address things like data accuracy. They address things like making sure the person who's creating the account actually is that person and give them options on how to do that. So yeah, I think that again, it's technology continues to evolve. It's come a long way, and creating accounts still has to be as seamless as possible. But there are regulatory issues and compliance issues the regulators are responding to with regard to their regulations.
The only thing I'd like to add to that from a regulator's point of view is that I think it's important when the regs are in and they're evaluated to ensure you have that process in place to account for further technology enhancements. Because obviously when you write the regs for certain different areas, whether it's KYC, responsible gaming, whatever it may be, we all know with technology, it's an ever-changing concept. So Eric, for example, mentioned a few things with KYC that, when we wanted to enhance our KYC process, we had things in place and things written where we could actually then mandate these best practices, and we could mandate the additional requirements when it comes to authenticating of the user. So I just want to throw from a regulator's point of view, when it comes to technology, one thing that is important is to always make sure that you keep account for the scenarios and different areas within that industry that technology will advance, and allow for those advancements within the actual regulatory framework. I think it's pretty critical.
And real quick, just to highlight a couple of things that both Joseph and Eric and Shane mentioned. Joseph mentioned the need for real time, right? In a digital world, if you're sending signals, whether it's compliance, fraud risk, whatever signals you're sending to an operator, if you're sending them in a manner that takes a human being 24 hours to process and make a decision on, by the time that decision has been made, the individual has already placed your business at a compliance risk or stolen tens of thousands of dollars fraudulently, right? So it has to be a real-time solution for sure. At GeoComply, we focus on looking at abnormal behavior and actioning that with real-time blocking technology, preventing the user or device or location from being able to play through any funds that are deposited, bonus abuse, all of those things. And then Eric touched on how KYC is so important, but because it does affect downstream operations, right? If you have a faulty KYC process, whether it's your identity verification process, or your authentication procedures to authenticate that that person is in fact Danny DiRenzo opening an account, it creates so many problems for you downstream, right? And then Shane touched on the importance from a regulated perspective of trying to be open to new technologies. And that is so important for so many reasons. But first and foremost is because suspicious behavior and fraudsters and people that are laundering funds, they evolve, right? They evolve routinely. They're like water finding a crack. They will, if you implement a countermeasure to stop a certain fraud typology, the next day, these fraudsters will develop their own countermeasures and circumvention. So it's important that regulators stay open to change and innovation as we keep up with the evolving fraud and behaviors.
And that was just if I can chime in one more time, I apologize. But for a lot of you guys that were joining and you were hearing the discussion between Danny and I, that's exactly what we were talking about. We were talking about how there's a lot of times with enhancements, you really do get the best of both worlds, where not only do you make things more robust, more secure, but at the same time, you have the ability to enhance the user experience. And I think we'd all be naive if we didn't admit that a part of the process that's so critical to these operators is really enhancing that user experience. And so there's times where we see situations where operators come to us and they want to present new concepts to us, new innovative concepts that we can see pretty quickly. This is really going to hit the best of both worlds. It's not only enhancing the security of a critical success factor within that industry, but also enhancing the user experience.
Great. You know, you guys all alluded to it. You know, we're in a multi-jurisdictional environment. There's a lot of regulations to keep track of. You know, what are the key challenges that online gambling operators face in maintaining compliance in that environment? And how can technology help them do that? And I'll throw that one over to Eric.
Yeah, sure. And that's a good question as well. So from my perspective, online gaming operators, especially those that operate in multiple markets in the United States and abroad, they have to deal with a patchwork of regulations, right? I mean, some jurisdictions, for instance, would require, from a licensing standpoint, affiliates to be registered, and others require them to have a full license. Some jurisdictions have, and every jurisdiction has its own technical requirements. So imagine you are a compliance officer and you're challenged to and you're operating in, 12 different jurisdictions, and you're challenged to maintain, the renewals for all of the different licenses for the people that are required to be licensed, and they're on all different schedules and there's all different requirements for that. You're required to develop internal controls based upon the local jurisdiction rules, and they may be different in different jurisdictions. And then you have regulators that come up with new advisories or changes to the regulations that you have to evaluate to make sure your internal controls are updated. So it's a tremendous challenge for people in the compliance space. It's also a challenge for European operators who are just trying to get launched in the United States. Which jurisdiction do we target, and why? What are the requirements? What are the expected costs entering that jurisdiction? And that really, I talked about earlier about Playbook and odds-on compliance technology. And that's really where Playbook really fits in. Talk a little bit more about what it does. I mentioned the fact that it brings all regulations into one place, one searchable database. It's not just casino gaming. It's online casino regulations. It's retail sports. It's online sports. It's iLottery. It's fantasy. All those regulations in the United States, Canada, Europe, now in Brazil as well. We have this information. It's there for you so that you can query it. But it does more than just allow you to query it. It allows you to take notes. It allows you to fill in the blanks where there's gray areas. When you talk to a regulator, you can take notes. You can share those notes with other people in your organization. And the regulations in our database are updated daily. And you're alerted as a compliance person to changes in those regulations, especially if you have notes there. You'd want to take notice that the regulations have changed so that you can easily stay on top of changes in the marketplace. And to easily, and then there's one really cool feature that we've just added, and that allows you to categorize data, right? So I'm a compliance person and I'm looking at New Jersey regulations and I'm looking at, yeah, maybe I'm interested in licensing requirements and licensing costs. I can now categorize, go through the regulations. They may be found in multiple different locations, but tag them as licensing or licensing costs. And I can do that in other jurisdictions so that when I want to see everything that has to do with licensing, I just look for my tag on licensing and it brings it all together. It allows me to quickly and easily compare information across jurisdictions. It's a tremendous tool. It's really powerful. And it's, you know, at this point, we're really making headway, and a lot of the biggest operators in the industry are using this product for that reason, because it helps them to stay on top of the changes in the industry and to navigate those changes and to understand the differences between jurisdictions.
I guess I would chime in too. With some aspects of risk management, like monitoring players, like if we're talking about anti-money laundering, RG, a lot of times it doesn't even matter. Like and that might be surprising to say, but it doesn't really matter what the local regulations are, because there's like best practices. There's just ways to go about monitoring for patterns of activity, risk scoring players. You know the elements. Like you need a risk score, you need to monitor transaction activity, you need to have a good case management tool to organize your information, investigate it, and take actions on it, right? And so there might be nuances to like things that some jurisdictions require versus other, but if you have a good technology tool, and I always challenge technology companies when I talk to them in the compliance space to think broad, just like the local regulators should think broad and say, let's make space for technology. The technology should think broad and say, does it really matter what the nuance is? Like you're supposed to monitor like this threshold versus that threshold. If you give people the ability to change the thresholds in the software, right? And to adapt the software to their needs, you have the same workflows, you have the same types of things that you're doing in the software. That's not to say it's a general rule. It doesn't apply to like really specific things. Like if you're doing ID verification and there's different requirements, different data points to check, but software companies can be pretty smart about how they build their technology so it can be adapted to different jurisdictions. There's all kinds of things you can do in technology to make it possible. And like what Eric was saying about the playbook, right? Doesn't matter what the laws are in each jurisdiction, right? It's the fact that you can aggregate those laws and regulations and make it easier for people to take actions on them, make notes in them and things like that. And so I think it's easy to sometimes get really caught up on the fact that every state is a little bit different when we can look at it from a technology perspective and provide good, solid technology that works, you know, across the country.
I don't disagree with what you just said, Joseph, at all. I think technology can overcome a lot of the fragmentation, but I would say from a behavioral standpoint, I think it does. The fragmentation does have a real world impact on compliance. And what I mean by that is when North Carolina launches, which we just found out is going to be March 11th, when they do launch, they have an identity authentication requirement, right? Meaning not only are we doing age and identity verification, but we have very strict standards similar to New Jersey on what needs to be done to authenticate this identity. Virginia doesn't have those same requirements, right? So North Carolina, if I'm underage, if I'm using a stolen identity and I can't get through the authentication component, I might just hop in my car and drive to Virginia and open my accounts there, right? So I think the fragmentation, best practices, I guess is probably a better way to refer to it, actually does have some real world impact on the ability of people that are going to engage in money laundering or fraud, right? Certainly would impact some of their behaviors and where they do it.
So related to that, you know, there is a lot of fragmentation in the industry, not just at the regulatory level, but at the operator level. that creates the kind of problems that Danny was talking about. How can collaboration and information sharing among operators, regulators, and suppliers contribute to overcoming some of those issues, creating a more standardized and more effective approach in the industry? I'll shoot this over to Shane, actually.
So I'm really glad that Danny brought that up, because I think that's a great transition into this topic. And he hit on a couple things that I think are critical. When it comes to fragmentation and collaboration, it really is all about, in my opinion, everyone having very similar standards when it comes to these key areas. And just bringing up certain examples that I've seen when it's not done in a standardized format, there are situations where the patrons are going to be the ones that are actually hurt. This is all obviously public knowledge, but we know there were cybersecurity incidents that occurred at the end of 2022 in November and December. And as we progress in this online industry, one of the common things is this concept of having a shared wallet, a shared account across all the jurisdictions. And it makes sense. Absolutely 100% makes sense that whatever username and password that I have should work in all the jurisdictions. I shouldn't have to recreate that whole onboarding process with every single jurisdiction. So from a business standpoint, absolutely 100% makes sense. But I think what needs to happen is you have this collaboration amongst the operators, amongst the various regulators, to ensure that we're all at the same level, at the same standard. And I use the MFA best practices as a great example. So when we adopted the MFA best practices, one of the key elements to it was that ultimately, in an effort to prevent credential stuffing attacks and to make sure that your accounts would not be compromised, when you would log in, you have to input a PIN. Once you input your PIN, we know that device belongs to you. For the next 2 weeks, you didn't have to input a PIN. However, not all jurisdictions required that. And one other key element I have to throw in there is, if I tried to log in from another device, not the one that was already registered, I'd have to do the whole PIN process all over again. So you're really tying that device to the patron. And so when these credential stuffing attacks occurred, and we would get notified by these operators that New Jersey patrons were attacked as well, the first question we had for everyone was, well, wait a minute, we don't understand, because if you had implemented the MFA process correctly, if a bad actor got my username and my password and tried to access my account, there'd be no way he'd have access to my account, because he wouldn't get the PIN that would be sent to my cell phone. And that's when we started to realize that some of the operators decided to make a business decision to say that if New Jersey requires it, we'll require that element in New Jersey. But if someone accesses their account from outside New Jersey and that jurisdiction, for example, doesn't require MFA, we won't do it. And what got missed in that process was, well, okay, then that means if a bad actor on the dark web gets my username and password and tries to log in from Texas, for example, well, they may not have to go through that MFA process, and they'd have access to my account and my funds, things like that. And so I love what Danny brought up, because it's so true that at the end of the day, it really comes down to these standardized processes that, in my opinion, should be across the board in all jurisdictions. And when you have those situations where, whether it's KYC might not require the authentication piece and they're only doing data accuracy, for cybersecurity, if they're not requiring MFA, we're really putting ourselves in a situation where you may have still your own patrons in a vulnerable situation because other jurisdictions don't have the same requirements. And so I think collaboration becomes very key in that, making sure that the operators understand that, you know, if I give the patron the opportunity to turn off MFA because they're not in New Jersey anymore, well, what are going to be the ramifications of that? If I basically determine I don't want to implement MFA at all, if it's not required in that jurisdiction, but I have that shared wallet, the shared account concept, what are the ramifications of that? And I think all of that comes from constant dialogue. One thing that we started recently is a monthly call with various operators and various regulators where we talk about RG. And it's literally a focus of, hey, what is your jurisdiction doing when it comes to RG? What are the new enhancements you guys are looking at adopting for law? And that type of collaboration, we have these discussions to see, hey, and I always like to use the phrase that one of our DAGs, Michael Golub, always uses, which is, it shouldn't be a race to the bottom, it should be a race to the top in terms of these standards. And so that's something that we think through these efforts of collaboration we'll get to.
Great, thank you. So thinking about innovation and how it impacts compliance, and we've given a lot of examples so far about how it's helping the industry do better, it's helping operators do better, it's helping regulators do better. So what are the barriers to innovation in this space? What could operators do to speed up development of new technologies? What could regulators and government do to encourage these new technologies to be developed? How can we drive a greater speed of innovation in the industry? And I want to hear from Joseph on this one.
Yeah, sure. I think there's been a lot of comments that have kind of touched on this, but some of my thoughts is really two items. The first is gaming companies, they often want new technology, but they're scared to go with a younger tech company. So a lot of people often think that bigger is better, and they want companies that are like $1 billion plus market caps and things like that. And then they get disappointed because they're not a priority. The company moves slow and the tech is old, right? And so there are a lot of emerging technologies in the gaming space. You've had a lot of these examples like on the call, like odds on compliance. You have OneComply that was just absorbed by GeoComply. You have these emerging, these companies leading this tech transformation. And it would be, operators would really do well to keep an eye on these emerging tech leaders and just sincerely evaluate their technology and see if it's a good fit for their company, and be open-minded for new brands coming into the space, new technologies coming into the space. And we already talked about on the regulatory side too, just regulators kind of keeping an eye on that and making sure the regulations can facilitate newer technology. And you know, we're seeing like the second aspect of that is gaming companies, in my opinion, need to continue to be more comfortable with cloud-based technologies. It's critical. Like, you're not going to do AML compliance with servers on your site. Like, I already talked about a lot of these points, but like, software updates are annual at best. If you do that and you have to have a human come out and go to a server to each gaming site and upload the new version of software, it's expensive, it's slow, your risk models are way out of date. If you're 2 or 3 versions behind, it means you're 2 or 3 years behind, right? And then limited connectivity across your enterprise to see patterns of activity across your entire enterprise. You can't do that with these servers on site. You don't have these roll-up views. You don't have these analytical views across your entire enterprise. You don't have connectivity to outside systems. You have very, very limited connectivity to outside systems when you have your infrastructure, you know, in your basement or on site in that way. And security is a big issue. Like, these servers are expensive. You're talking about $600,000 machines, and you keep them for 10 years. When's the last time you updated the firewalls on those things? You know, like, if you want modern technology, you have to have modern infrastructure to support that technology. And you have to have processing power. And if you have a limited set of servers, let's say you have 10 servers at your casino on site, you don't have the processing power to do like machine learning and AI. It would suck up all your machines and you couldn't actually run your facility. Your email would go down, your gaming, you know, all your gaming would go down. Your casino management system would go down. You would just suck up all your processing capacity. So it's very expensive to try to run this technology like on site in that way. And there's just too many limitations. So if we're talking about, you know, KYC in certain single point solutions could do it, and they do it. But when you're talking about investigations where you're taking every single wager, all the gameplay, you're talking about all the transactions, all the financial transactions, you're analyzing them and risk scoring them and identifying patterns, you need something that is truly modern technology that is scalable, and modern technology relies on modern infrastructure. So I would just say those are 2 things. It's just being more comfortable with emerging tech, and then secondly, or having an open mind and evaluating emerging tech. And then secondly, continuing to be more comfortable with cloud-based technologies.
Yeah, I'd like to jump on that, and I agree with what Joseph was saying. I think when you talk about barriers to innovation in the compliance space, oftentimes, you know, compliance is not the priority of a lot of operators. Operators want to get live, their marketing departments get the money and the innovation before the compliance folks do. there's regulatory risk there, and some of the better operators really develop a culture of compliance, and they're the ones that are really the most progressive when it comes to this space. But I think most of the innovation is pretty much driven by the regulators. I mean, let's face it, GeoComply wouldn't be here without the regulators requiring the geolocation technology and the standards that were put into place. U.S. integrity exists today because it's a requirement of regulations to have a monitoring service to be able to evaluate the data, to identify potential frauds, Proabet, again, driven by regulations. And the patchwork of regulations is what spurred on the development of odds-on compliance's playbook. So, all of the products that we're talking about have gotten better, and they provide a real value in the compliance space, but they were all brought on because regulations required it. And I think that in the future, we're going to see the same thing is happening now in the responsible gaming space and some of the initiatives that are happening there. And you're seeing like artificial intelligence being used in that space. Yeah, I don't necessarily see that regulation is bad, but it's definitely something that drives innovation in the compliance space.
I couldn't agree with that more, Eric. It's such an important point, because from an operator's perspective, I deal with most of the operators in the gaming industry in the United States, and my sense is that the vast majority of them want to be compliant. They want to lead the way in innovation and technology in a manner that will reduce user friction and increase their efficiency at identifying risk. But the number one obstacle is always, essentially, if I introduce a new technology that could help us in the compliance arena, whatever it is, whatever point in the player journey it is, I'm spending money that my competitors might not be. And B, I might be introducing some user friction that my competitors are not introducing, right? So in my opinion, and I say this as a former regulator and former law enforcement, I completely understand that argument from a business perspective. It's a valid point for them to make. And that is why what Eric said is so true and important. It really is incumbent upon regulators to sort of lead the way and create an even playing field for all operators when it comes to compliance technology.
The only thing I would add to that, and I agree with what you guys are saying in terms of you need to have that open-mindedness to actually encourage entities to come in, present the product, or the new enhancements, new technology, whatever could make the systems more robust. And I think from a regulator's point of view, you always have that balance of wanting to make sure that you encourage that because you want to bring these to the market, but at the same time, in no way being in a position where it looks like you're promoting one company over another. And
right.
That kind of goes back to what I'd mentioned at the beginning, which was when you are working on the regulations, you got to have those caveats of, we always like to throw in a little caveat of, or any other method approved by the division, where that's our way of saying we're encouraging entities to come to us. And what we've actually done with entities is say, okay, we love your product, totally makes sense. We understand how it fits within our requirements, and just get it integrated and come and present it to us so we can give you the full approval. And I think having that open-mindedness helps a lot because it really provides that guidance. And I think a lot of times I've seen the entities love that, little quote unquote pre-approval that we can provide to say, we think from a high level, what you're trying to do fits within our guidelines. This is great. Can't give you the full approval because we need to see it in an integrated environment. But I think that mentality helps. And it's something that I think we always try to strive for. We want to look at it. We're all partners in this industry together. We all have the same common goal here. We're in the same ecosystem. We just have different roles within that ecosystem. And obviously from a regulator, our role is to make sure that everything is compliant, but understanding that we want to be kind of help in that problem solving as opposed to being a problem creator. It's something we really try to strive for, and in encouraging entities to come and present new products is a part of that concept.
We have a question that sort of follows up on this. So I'm gonna ask it, and if you have any other questions, please put them in the Q&A. But it's, what should states be doing to support compliance businesses? So beyond the regulatory actions, what are the things they can be doing in terms of financial incentives, workforce development, infrastructure, You know, and I ask this sort of selfishly because we're an innovation center and this is our mission too here in New Jersey. So would love to hear thoughts on what states can be doing to encourage these businesses.
I have one thought, and it might not be state government. State government grants could help, but like there's accelerators popping up, startup accelerators that help people with ideas start companies and give them a good foundation to get going. And so you're seeing that out of the University of Las Vegas, UNLV now just launched one. And it's the first one ever in Nevada, which is shocking because you have a huge gaming presence in Nevada for a long time with companies that emerge, and they have huge headquarters and operations out of there, like slot machines and all kinds of like financial technologies. Yet there wasn't a company saying, if you have a good idea and you need help starting a company and learning how to do it, we're here to support you and help you, right? And they attract investors and they attract legal professionals, all kinds of things to help companies get started. So it was very popular in this concept. Y Combinator kind of led it in San Francisco, and that was how a lot of these young entrepreneurs in San Francisco said, I have a good idea, but I've never been a CEO before. You know, I'm 21 years old or 24 years old or whatever. And they would go and they would get the support they need to help start their companies. And so I think seeing things like that, support services, is huge. And then also, like we're talking here, like what David's doing at the research centers, I think that's massive, right? You get academics involved, you do research, then technology companies, from the technology perspective, you can rely on research a little more, use it as guideposts to say, like, what are some good technology innovations according to these research studies that we could do to help the industry. So those are two things I think is just supporting young entrepreneurs with good ideas, and then also these research type centers.
All right, so I want to get to this question. It's the question I like to ask all these panels, but you know, it's what the future holds. You know, so we've talked a little bit already about emerging technologies. We've talked about AI. We've talked about machine learning. We've talked about, you know, data analytics and all these things. So what does the future hold for compliance in this space? You know, what new technologies should we expect to see coming out in the next 5 years?
I'll take that one, David, if you don't mind. I think, you know, from a high level, one of the things we're going to see is compliance technology and risk-based decision models changing from a photograph or a snapshot in time to a motion picture movie, right? Where we're not relying on one single point in time, can Danny Dorenzo answer this KBA question or not? But instead of that, Joseph's talked about this a little bit, I think, we're looking at a broad collection of intelligence signals, risk intelligence signals that analyze behavior, patterns, connections of users, devices, locations. We just launched a new identity authentication product called Core for Authentication, which does just that, right? And Shane, some of you may have heard Shane and I talking about it when you joined the webinar this morning. But it essentially integrates multiple signals, behavioral patterns, location signals, device signals, phone number signals, all into one risk-based decision. You know, should this person be onboarded or not? Have we authenticated this identity or not? So I think in the future, we're going to see more of that. Listen, the gaming industry has an overwhelming number of data points, right? Collection of data is not a problem that we have. Integrating it, making it digestible, and getting it to the operators who are the decision makers in real time is where we're moving towards.
Yeah, I'd like to jump on that, Danny, and just to add that, you know, along those lines, cybersecurity and data privacy is going to continue to be an increased focus. The more you use, the more there's use of data focused on products and services, at least the greater risk of cyber-related privacy events, right? You're more likely to see a more coordinated approach among regulators to address that issue. And I see that being an emerging kind of issue for all regulators in the space. I just a couple of other things off the top of my head that I thought of. You know, responsible gaming, obviously, that's going to emerge as a hot topic. And how do you use artificial intelligence to kind of identify people that are at risk? New Jersey's taken the lead in that space and putting out best practices, thoughts on that. And that technology will continue to evolve. And the other thing I see happening, and it's not necessarily a technology issue, but it's more of, I think, as regulators mature, I mean, we've had a pretty fast expansion of gaming across the country. And there's been a race to get operational, and regulators that have not had experience in this space, had to ramp up really quickly. And I think that even operators, the focus was really to get live and operational. And in some cases, internal controls were kind of like a checkbox. They had to get it done, and they put them up and they provide them to regulators. But are they living documents? Do they accurately reflect how these operators operate? And I think there's going to be a focus on auditing and making sure that operators are operating in accordance with their internal controls. I see that happening around the country as well. There's a kind of a few areas that I see.
All right, we've got a few questions here. We've only got a few minutes, so we might not get to all of them, but I want to ask a couple. One is specifically for Eric about gambling laws in Brazil and compliance in Brazil. What efforts are being done in the landscape regarding gambling in Brazil, since the regulations can vary by region? How's that being tackled?
Yeah, so look, Brazil is an emerging market. What we've done is taking the regulations, kind of like we've done in the United States, and pulled them into our playbook. I think that aspect of gaming is still emerging, and it's kind of a wait and see for us at this point. We have not done much work in Brazil, maybe some licensing work, but operationally, I think that it still remains to be seen. But what I can tell you is that as regulations come out, as official guidance comes out from the government and the regulatory agencies, we will embed that into our product to help people that are interested in operating in that space to be able to kind of research the regulations on their own and compare them to jurisdictions in the United States. Or, what we would do is help operators and engage with the regulators down there to make sure that licensing issues are addressed and that operational compliance is addressed with their product.
Great. And the other question is, and I've heard this question a few times, so just interested to get people's reactions to it. Do you see a benefit if there were uniform federal regulations versus the current patchwork of state regulations? Do you ever think that'll happen? And do you see the federal government getting involved in regulating gaming at any level?
I have a very short answer to that. As a former 25-year federal employee, I feel comfortable saying this. The federal government is never the solution.
The only thing I was going to add to that was, obviously that's a decision the federal government has to make, but I just know, and again, this is from my perspective, and Eric could attest to this because he was obviously here in 2013 when internet gaming launched, but whether it was the launch of internet gaming, whether it was the launch of sports betting in 2018, there was a tremendous amount of work and research that was conducted to adapt to what the regulation should be, and really focusing on what was the skill set that we needed. And you get to a certain point where you start to feel very comfortable with everything that's going on, whether it's, you're at a point where now when it comes to internet gaming, nothing really shocks you because you're so used to it, you have so much experience with it. Same thing with sports. So it's a situation where for my opinion, just think that, again, that's a question really for the federal government to answer, but we put in all that effort, we put in all that work to really learn the nuances of all of the different aspects of the industry and become so comfortable and so knowledgeable with it. We didn't do that for just the sake of someone else eventually taking it over, if that makes any sense. We did it for continuously expanding our knowledge in that industry so that we can continue making sure that we're promoting it and we're doing as much as we can to make it as successful as possible in New Jersey.
All right, thanks, guys. That brings us right down to 1 minute left in our program today, so I'm going to wrap it up. I want to thank our panelists for all of their great thoughts and contributions to this discussion. I want to thank the attendees for joining us today. A recording of this will be available to you. You get an email follow-up to that. And I'd like to invite everyone to join us on February 22nd for our next panel, which will be Innovation and Integrity. We've got a great panel for that. We've got Chris Adams, the CEO of SharpRank. We've got Matt Heap from Proibet, Eric's colleague. And we're going to have Director Rebuck from DGE joining us for that one as well. So we're excited about that panel. So you can check that out. Emails will be going out about that soon. Follow us on LinkedIn, or you can go to our website, ftswinnovation.org. And with that, I'd like to thank everyone, say goodbye, have a great day, and we'll see you soon.
Thanks,
Thank you,
David.
guys.
everybody.
Have a good day. Bye.
Bye.